our main goal over this series is to look at the great leaders of our past, those who've been blessed with the title of saint, and see the situations that they had and they had to deal with, and how they might kind of translate to the situations that we have in our life that we need to deal with. And this whole idea of called to lead seems to permeate a lot of what we're doing at St. Teresa's for so many of the different classes. I know that they're doing a Bible study with King David and how he was called to leadership. So this idea of leadership seems to be kind of the theme that ties together so many of the events and of the groups that we're having this year. So here's a little bit about the scope of these gatherings. They're only 30 minutes, and as you can tell, they're paired with coffee and donuts, so there's like distractions and stuff all around. So I'm not expecting to like communicate some super amazing, wonderful truth to you, but if God decides to do that, that's awesome. There's my smiley face. What I'm trying to do is spark conversation and build friendships. So what we'll do every week in between the masses is pick out a saint. And look at this saint, first of all, because they're part of our family heritage. I know it's really cool for me in genealogy to look back at some of the people in my life and my family history and how they inspire me to kind of be the best man that I can be today. And especially when I discover something new about them. It's pretty awesome. Another goal is to hone our skills and activate God's grace. And what I mean by that is there are certain skills that the saints develop simply by living their lives well and trying to strive for virtue. There are other skills that they had that they didn't develop themselves. They came as a byproduct of being close to Christ. And that's something that we always miss, I think. We try so hard to read these leadership books and to go to these seminars and try to develop how we can be the best that we can be. But what these saints did, and some of these saints, of course, created religious orders that span the length of time beyond governments and nations. And what they were able to do is have that inner strength because they took time away to center themselves and rely on God. So what we're usually going to do is have a saint for each Sunday, which is cool because you can bring a friend or something and it's not necessarily a consecutive class that you have to follow like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's really not even a class at all. It's an experience of having a saint present in front of us so that we can see if there are certain themes in their life, certain threads of their experience that might, again, affect ours or be of help to the situations that we're facing in our life. Another thing I talked to Brian about is that we're not publishing the saints in advance that we're going to talk about because something may occur in the world where a different saint would have appealed to the times. For example, I wasn't going to necessarily talk about Padre Pio, but Ryan said, there's a movie out about Padre Pio, so I said, well, okay. So for example, that's one of those situations in which life might, move around. So just come and expect to be surprised. The first thing that I would kind of emphasize as I survey, the point today is not necessarily to talk about a saint on his or her own right now, but to sort of look at the kind of things we're looking for in their life and develop a language. So I want to look at what's in common to many of the men and women that we're going to meet over the next few Sundays. The first is that they very often did not start with some heroic act. They weren't beginning their ministry by doing something that made them famous. They began their ministry by seeking God and holiness in everyday life. So everyday life, they tilled the soil. Everyday life, they did the deal. And they tried to prepare themselves for the day where God might call them to be needed. I like this quote from St. Vincent De Paul. A man or woman without mental prayer is not good for anything. He cannot even renounce the slightest thing. It's a beautiful quote to me, because if you can't renounce anything at all, if you have the lack of discipline, how could you ever be called to anything great and be expected to pursue it? Now, there is space for God's grace, of course, but I think about St. Vincent De Paul and who he was and what he must have faced and the patience he must have had. I learned from Bishop Danny, never name a parish St. Vincent De Paul, because you get all the calls for St. Vincent De Paul. So people Google St. Vincent de Paul, and so they're calling his parish all the time when he was there. But to think about all the work that he did, it had to come from this inner well of a depth of experience and the ability to have a discipline, to renounce the things that get in the way of us encountering God. So, over the next, it's a long time, it's like 2 months, as we look at each saint, these are some glasses that I put on. These are some things that I was trying to find in each saint. These are some kind of common threads that I think in their life. Now, each and every one of them is going to be different. Some developed Catholic hospitals throughout the United States. Some developed religious orders. Some took care of the poor that were among them. But they seem to have certain qualities in common. They sought holiness. We'll talk about that. They sought integrity in their life. And that word, it's good to have a good definition for that word. 3, they know themselves and their world. 4, they didn't plan to change everything. They started with a specific need. 5, they always exhibited a reliance on God and others. And 6, you could tell them by their fruits. So each one of these we're going to kind of look at with the saints that we'll be surveying in the next month and a half or so. The first is that they strive for holiness. Each and every saint in their life strived for holiness. And I put this image up here, which is one of my favorite images, because what is holy? It is that which is of God, it is that which is powerful, it is that which is set apart. And so what the saints did is realize that not every vessel can contain the power of God. The power of God is tremendous. In fact, as God spoke to Moses, he said, take your sandals off, be fully vulnerable in front of me, because that's the only way you can contain anything that I'm about to say to you. So holiness is the power of God, and these saints, what they strive to do in their daily life was to kind of create in themselves this space for God to dwell. I think about it like a Pyrex glass. You know how you have those Pyrex glass in the oven? If you put regular glass in the oven, it'll shatter. But if you have Pyrex, you can go up to like 450 degrees or so. This is also Father Barry's baking channel. So, but why? Because it is tempered glass. It is made and forged over time to be able to contain heat. And that's what saints did. They strive to set themselves up in such a way through their discipline that they were able to carry the very presence of God. And in doing so, they were like mini monstrances, you can say, and people fell in love with them because they were able to lead from that inner strength. So practical outcomes of striving for holiness, as we'll talk about in the next few weeks, is that the more that we try to take this space to allow God to dwell within us, the more that there's clarity in our life. And that's something that a lot of people strive for, and that we can't find necessarily by Googling. There's an enhanced humility. The more that God sort of permeates our soul, takes over, the more he increases and we decrease, but at the same time, the more we lose our life and we find it. There's a greater capacity to inspire others because we're never running out of batteries. We're connected to the source of power itself. And we have this enhanced focus. And this focus really, I think, comes about in this next topic that I see when I look at all of these saints as leaders. They had integrity. And I use this image right here because they're different letters, but they're put into right alignment. And that's what integrity is. Integrity is taking all of the disparate, all of the separate things in our life and kind of saying, how do they align? I'm a mom or a dad. I'm also a husband or a wife. I also work at this job. I also do this. I play golf every so often. How do I take all of these individual silos or spheres and be one central person with one central idea and one central mission? And some of the saints we'll look at in the coming weeks develop this by developing what we call a rule of life, like St. Benedict or even Ignatius. There were certain things that they said, this is what I'm going to do every day. For us today, it may look like taking a Google Calendar and scheduling 30 minutes to pray. It's funny, we don't do that in our normal calendars. But I know that if I have a meeting in my calendar, I'm not going to miss it. Like, for example, if it says meet with Father Larry at this time, I am not missing that, or I go back to being kind of destroyed by the Holiness picture. So commitments are important. Another thing about the saints that I hope that we will explore together is how they knew themselves in the world. So take St. Ignatius of Loyola, who lived from 1491 to 1556, right as Columbus is beginning his journey to the New World. He knew himself because he got injured, and he had to lay in bed for a while after a cannonball accident. Now we're talking about history here. Like, he was on a field and a cannonball hit his leg. So that's going to destroy your leg pretty much. And he was confined as he was recovering. And the only books that he had were religious books. So what he did was he looked at that and he fell in love with this idea of Christianity as an adventure. As an adventure of finding ourselves, as an adventure of finding others, an adventure of winning people under the banner of God. And what he did was he inspired all these young men who were priests. And at that time, what was priesthood? La, 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 amen. And he said, okay guys, that's wonderful, that's great. You can get on ships with me and travel the world and win souls for Christ. He plugged into this desire of the young men at the time to do something great with their lives, to have meaning and purpose. He knew his world, and he tapped into this yearning for discovery and adventure, and he created a religious order by the grace of God that continues that spirit of adventure today. He was disciplined enough to respond whenever the Lord called him. And he developed a prayer that we'll talk about later on in more detail called the Examen. What was unique about this prayer is that for centuries people had been reading the Bible and then kind of using their imagination to go through different scenes and say, all right, where am I in this scene? What he said is, just as unique, just as valuable, just as privileged place to find God is your own life. Just as God wrote Scripture and it's sacred, He created you in His image and likeness, and you are sacred. So your life itself is a book that you can read, go back and forward, see your dreams and desires, go back into your past, and use that book as an experience of encountering God, which is genius. And so one of the things that St. Ignatius invented that I really love is this examen during different times of the day. And it's a prayer of centering ourselves and finding God. And what I learned from this specific prayer is I used to have an encounter with someone, and then I'd have a bad day the rest of the day, right? They ruined my day, right? That was like every Tuesday or something. So what I can do with the examen at lunchtime is say, okay, my morning is gone. They don't have to ruin my afternoon. I can stop, pause, reset, and move forward. So that's some of the genius of the examen prayer. And it comes with knowing yourself, right? Some of the greatest saints that we'll survey coming up some of the greatest leaders of the church started with a need. They were able to identify one specific need. These are Irish immigrants who are being discriminated against in the public school system. We need to create a space where they're shown their dignity. Catholic school systems. There are hospitals that are becoming overwhelmed. We as a church see a person in pain as someone who is worthy of our time, of our gifts, and of our heart. Catholic hospitals. All of these things came about as a result of a need that was seen. And instead of saying, why doesn't someone do something about this, which a lot of people do today, these saints were able to step into that breach and do something about it. So some objects of reflection, some items of reflection in the next few weeks that we'll look at are, what are the human and spiritual needs around us now? We don't have to fix every single problem, but what is one seemingly little thing you can do to address this need better? What resource do you have that can be given away? And again, it doesn't have to be money. We always think of that. But what gift do we have that we're confident about? And God has allowed us to live in that confidence, that we're confident enough to give to someone else or to a situation. Again, I'm just throwing this stuff out there as topics we're going to be looking at, and each saint is going to be kind of like a different facet on a diamond, kind of radiating a different light or a different answer to these questions. Another aspect of the saints, as I was looking at them for this course, is that they had this very strong reliance on God and others. We underestimate how much people want to be included in our endeavors, especially when we're passionate about them. The power of personal invitation, in my experience, seems very underutilized in the church. And some of y'all heard from one of my homilies a few weeks ago that I was falling asleep at Mass when I was in high school, when a guy approached me and said, "You seem bored at Mass, would you like to be an usher?" Sure. I don't know the verb to ush. I don't know what ushing means. Still to this day, I've been a priest for almost 10 years. I don't know what ushing is. But that man invited me out of my chair and into a community. He didn't judge me and say, "Look at that kid sleeping at Mass. Man, his mom is awful." He said, "Here's a need, a person in need, and here's a gap that needs to be filled. I'm going to link those two together." So I started going to Mass more. I had to come early, and I started seeing people from a vantage point that I had never before. I got to see people praying. And I said, there's something here in this faith. Slowly, over time, I got more and more involved in my faith. But it would never have happened if that man hadn't come up to me that day. So the power of personal invitation. Saints were always seeing someone who needed something and tying them to that need within the church. The saints drew people into their mission. And people want to be a part of a vision. They want to be part of something excellent. They want to be a part of the future that they can help create. And saints were able to kind of plug into that innate desire within us to want to do something and be a part of something greater than ourselves. And finally, we'll see how the saints are fruitful. By their fruits, you will know them. Go back to St. Ignatius. How do I know that he was fruitful? There are still Jesuits running around everywhere. Authentic leaders and shepherds produce positive outcomes. And they produce people. They produce disciples to carry on the mission. And there also seems to be a type of love when you're involved in the mission of a saint that casts out fear. And what I mean by that is the people who followed some of the greatest leaders in the church did so because their love for the possible future was way deeper than their fear of what could possibly stand in the way. And to be able to do that as a leader, to help cast out fear, is something that I think separates, in many ways, secular leaders from religious leaders, because secular leaders are usually looking at outcomes. That's part of their job. That's what they have to do. They have to take care of their shareholders. They have to make sure that the company exists in the next few years. So there's a kind of a fear sometimes in secular leadership, especially among managers who are like, will I lose my job? The great thing about Christian leadership is that we have the possibility to gain Christ and to make a more perfect world that mirrors the kingdom that he desires for us. And he has also cast out any reason for fear through his resurrection. Right? If you look at the early apostles who ran away, except for one that stood with his mom at the cross, they come back. They see him present before them. And he walks through the door. And I imagine that they're like, oh no, we're going to get it, because we left him. We left him when he needed it the most. But he stands there resurrected and he says, peace be with you. Where I go, you will also be. In my Father's house there are many mansions. But how do I know the way? How do I get there? You don't get there. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. You don't earn heaven. I take you there. And so with that, the Roman Empire couldn't squash the early Christians, because what can you do to people who aren't afraid? What can you do to people who have had the fear of everything cast out of them, including death? They were like, okay, well, you're going to get crucified. Well, can you crucify me upside down? Because I don't deserve to be crucified like my master. What? Fine, we're going to line you up and send you to be chewed up by lions. Great. The line out the door was even more than Black Friday, because people were like, I get to die like my Lord? Awesome. Awesome. Because the more perfectly I conform myself to his death, the more perfectly I conform myself to his resurrection. So great leaders cast out any kind of fear, because just the future, vision that's inspired, the desire for that consumes the soul. So, look at that, 10:40. I've done this once or twice in my life. So this is really only supposed to be for 30 minutes or so. So it's in between Mass times. But we've charted our course. And what's going to happen is Ryan and I are going to meet weekly, talk together, pray together, try to find a saint that meets the needs for this week, for this month, for our time, and explore how they can be channels of God's grace and how they were channels of God's grace. And allow their lives to inspire our own. Good. Brian, I didn't know if you wanted to take any questions, or he's whispering, go for it. So that's good. Any questions, clarifications? Again, this is going to be something that Ryan and I are praying week by week. What does St. Teresa's need? What do the people need? So I'm not going to necessarily list a schedule of saints. However, I will say some of the big ones that I mentioned will be up there, like St. Ignatius of Loyola. And if you have any saints that have been inspirational to you in your life, feel free to either email either one of us, and we would love to take a look at that and see if that can be something that will transmit more inspiration to the people of St. Teresa. Basically, it's a time to be together, be inspired, and grow in friendship. Any concerns? Yep.
Oops, it wasn't a concern.
Yep, no, it's okay.
So it's okay?
That's okay, even if it was a concern.
Okay, I really things are bad. What the deal is I was just thinking it'd be really nice as a fairly new parishioner here, as Father Barry knows, I'm an evacuee from St. Mary's Cathedral. But holy cards for people my age are just like executive summaries of what a saint is about or a prayer. I know you all don't have a gift shop, but that might be something to think about as passing out a holy card about St. Ignatius.
Cool.
Or big things never seem to work. It's like little things do. And that could be because I kind of ran a gift shop for a while. I don't get any gift kickback. That's just fun.
Yeah, I know a priest that kept every holy card that someone ever gave him, which is a lot. And so his prayer book, his breviary looked like a giant Rolodex.
Right.
He could barely even open it. It was like that. But he wanted to remember.
They have to be laminated. That's a class deal. Okay.
All right. Yeah.
What's the Padre Pio movie that just came out?
Ryan, can you talk about? I don't know about that too much.
If you,
I know it's a big thing. Right
hop
now.
on YouTube and just look, search for the Padre Pio movie. Bishop Barron recently interviewed the main actor in it, and it looks really promising. Haven't seen it, so that's not an official endorsement.
Where is the movie? Where do you see it? On YouTube?
It's not out yet. It's in production right now.
So from what I understand, and again, big caveat because I don't follow this, is that one of the main actors or the actor that portrayed Padre Pio, through that process, experienced an inner conversion to the church. And so that's kind of the segue to the interview with Bishop Barron, is he's saying, wow, how could like stepping into this man's shoes transform you so much? And that's kind of the overarching goal of this, even though it's just kind of 30 minutes of hanging out, is that even just spending a short amount of time in the shoes of a saint can actually make a huge difference in our own interior conversion. Yep.
Father Barry, I know there's a movie coming. I think it's only for 2 days. October 3rd and 4th, about St. Mother Teresa.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know any details besides what I've seen on doing it.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I'm starting to get to that age where I don't keep up with everything as soon as it comes out. It's weird to have technology start passing me by. It wasn't that long ago. So I was ordained about 9 years ago. Man, I was like the iPhone 5. Everyone's like, man, Father Barry is so awesome. Okay, cool. And then now there's the iPhone 13. And I'm like, well, I still call people. I still function. So, but no, it's good. It's good. But yeah, I'm definitely feeling it sometimes with all of the social media stuff. It's very hard for me to keep up with. Cool. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace.